Hello, and welcome to the first episode of the Pink Chicken Economics, where we will discuss what you should have read in the Essentials of Economics textbook, Chapter 2, Economic Markets, Charts, and Graphs. This podcast was written, drawn by, edited, and photographed by Madison Sinus and Hannah Rademacher. This production of the podcast would have been made possible with our own pink chicken.
The best way to introduce the concept of the circular flow chart is with a chart comparing the production possibilities of two different goods. In 2 months, I am able to crochet 4 blankets and 0 hats. In another 2 months, I am able to crochet 3 blankets and 8 hats, or 2 blankets and 16 hats, 1 blanket and 24 hats, or 0 blankets and 32 hats. Opportunity cost is shown in this chart between each set of 2 months. I am able to crochet 8 hats, but I also lose the ability to crochet 1 blanket. As I crochet an increasing amount of blankets, like 1 to 2 blankets, I lose the ability to make 8 hats. Per unit opportunity cost helps us look at the opportunity cost between each of the two goods. As I crochet 8 hats, I lose 1 blanket. Thus, the per unit opportunity cost of 1 blanket is 8 hats. And as I crochet 1 blanket, I lose 8 hats. Thus, 1 hat equals 1/8 of a blanket. If I were to plot these points, I would see a graph with a constant slope. This type of graph shows a constant opportunity cost graph, because as I make the same amount of hats, I lose the same amount of blankets. This is also because when I crochet hats and blankets, their materials, such as yarn, are the exact same. The other and more common form of an opportunity cost graph shows increasing opportunity cost when the two goods being compared are made of very different resources. When a factory produces both bikes and cars, the opportunity cost is increasing between them because their compositions are very different. Before looking at comparative advantage and absolute advantage, you need to be able to show differences between two competitors making the same goods with different production capabilities. My grandma, who taught me to crochet, is able to crochet 8 blankets in the same 2-month period. She is also able to make 6 blankets and 12 hats, or 4 blankets and 24 hats, 2 blankets and 36 hats, or 48 hats and 0 blankets. As my grandmother crochets 12 hats, she loses 2 blankets. Thus, the per unit opportunity cost is 1 hat equals 1/6 of a blanket. 1 blanket also equals 6 hats because as my grandmother crochets 2 blankets, she loses 12 hats. And again, as you look at the graph, it shows a constant opportunity cost because it has a constant slope. Absolute advantage occurs when one competitor is able to consistently produce more of a good than another competitor. If you were to look at the production capabilities of my grandma's crocheting and my crocheting, you would see that she has the absolute advantage in both blankets and hats because she is able to crochet more blankets in 2 months and more hats in 2 months than I am. Comparative advantage occurs when one competitor's opportunity cost is lower to produce a good than another competitor's. If you look at my per unit opportunity cost to produce hats, it is lower than my grandmother's 1/6. And if you look at my grandmother's opportunity cost to produce a blanket, it is lower than my 8. In the real world, looking at comparative advantage helps countries or businesses decide if they want to trade with each other. If I were to specialize in making hats at my lower opportunity cost of 1/8, and my grandmother was to specialize in making blankets at her lower opportunity cost of 6, and we were each to trade with each other, we would be able to gain more of our goods.
Another important economic model is the circular flow chart that shows the distribution of money, goods, and services between households, which are individuals, and firms, such as businesses. The inner flow arrows show how households supply resources such as labor for the factor markets that are then used by the firms to produce goods and services for the markets for goods and services that are then sold back to the households. An example of this would be individuals who produce cotton for the factor markets that are then sold by the firms to produce hats that are sold to the markets for goods and services and then bought by the households. The outer rim of arrows show how the households buy goods from the markets for goods and services going to firms who bought resources from factor markets such as labor and crops that were supplied by the households. Going back to our previous example, we can see how the households bought hats from the markets for goods and services that were supplied by the firms who bought their resources from the factor markets who paid the households for their labor and other resources that were supplied. While the circular flowchart is a good example of household to firm transactions, it does not show every kind of transaction. Some that are missing are firm to firm transactions, small business transactions, where the small business is the household and the firm, and government transactions, where the government inserts money in but also takes money out by the form of taxes. The last topic discussed in Chapter 2 is positive versus normative economics, which in a nutshell are facts versus opinions. Positive economics is how the economy works, while normative economics are how the economy should work, keyword being should. Positive economics are the forecasts that lead to the ideas discussed in normative economics. An example of this would be a graph from positive economics showing how making higher education free leads to more students attending college. Thus, the normative economic statement would be that making higher education free leads to more Americans attending college and thus a smarter America. The final topic to be discussed in positive versus normative economics is why economists differ. One reason being that they disagree about the simplifications made in the graph, and the other is that they are people and people have different values. An example of this would be another graph that shows that by making higher education free, the teachers are paid less, leading to a normative economic headline reading that free college makes for more underpaid and unhappy teachers. The thing to remember in this topic is that they are just models, and models cannot show all possible answers.
This concludes our first episode of the Pink Chicken Economics, where we have discussed the production possibilities curve, comparative and absolute advantage, the circular flow chart, and positive and normative economics.